Our graduations for our clients that we call make it to the podium, graduate to the podium, those celebrations, they happen on Thursday nights during our family programming, which our family programming happens 5 times a year. And these are big celebrations. I mean, lots of people come from all over the country, outside of the country, to show up and celebrate a graduation, right? So you've got, maybe if it's a young person, mom and dad or sisters, brothers, and you know their clients or their fellow partners in recovery that they've forged relationships and friendships with for that 2.5 years are all there to speak on their behalf. And it's huge because by that point, 2.5 years, I mean, they're unrecognizable in terms of how their lives have transformed.
All right, welcome back, everybody. My name is B. Reeves. I'm the Director of Business Development here at New Waters Recovery, and I'm sitting here with our CEO, Justin McClendon. And our very special guest today is the now CEO of Burning Tree in Texas, Brook McKenzie. Welcome, Brook.
Thanks, B. Justin, I appreciate you guys having me on. It's an honor to get to be here.
Glad to have you, man.
Very glad to have you. Very glad to have you. We love Burning Tree. And like we were talking about before we started, I'm coming out there to visit next week. Very excited about that. But just from knowing the people who work there and people who have been there, some of them are people who have been there and now work there. And I'm talking to one of them now. I just consider, and we consider Burning Tree the gold standard in the treatment center world for long-term treatment for chronic relapsers. And I just kind of wanted to hear a little bit about, how does it being long-term, nobody wants to go to treatment at all generally, and especially for that long. I mean, how do you get people to buy in to come into Burning Tree?
Yeah, B, that's a good question. I still ask myself that question from time to time. And, first and foremost, thanks for having me on the show. We're really, really excited to host you next week at Burning Tree Ranch. We're really grateful to be in partnership and friends with New Waters Recovery, and we appreciate everything you guys do. Yeah, I think you said it best. I mean, the persons that need Burning Tree the most want it the least, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the question on the table is, with so many treatment options, how does someone end up coming or choosing long-term treatment when they could go to another 30, 60, 90-day program? And, typically how this works, I think most importantly, is all of our clients really come from a referent, right? In some cases, it could be an interventionist. A lot of times it's another treatment provider, or it's a physician or a psychiatrist or a therapist. In some cases, a nurse. Obviously, yes, attorneys are a big referent to Burning Tree Ranch. A lot of times that's probate attorneys, right? Attorneys that are working on wills and trusts and estate planning. And then from time to time, even criminal attorneys, a third or fourth DUI. There's the advent of going to prison for a period of time or a long probation sentence. And the attorney will reach out to us to find out and explore alternative sentencing, right? So there's a lot of different avenues, but one thing that most of the clients end up having in common is that none of them are raising their hand in the air saying, sign me up for long-term treatment, I want to go. And that's really regardless of whatever consequences may be looming. And it could be in some cases, hey, your inheritance is at risk. Hey, your marriage is at risk. Hey, your career, your licensure as a professional is at risk. Still, all those things combined typically aren't enough to tip the scales, right? So what we found that typically works is combined joint leverage, right? So one thing that also all of our clients have in common is they all have family members that love them, that are willing to do more work on their behalves than the client themselves, right? That means they're willing to get together. They're willing at this point, once long-term treatment's on the table, they're willing to take some suggestion. They're willing to explore what hasn't worked in the previous 6, 12, or 20 treatment episodes, right? And they're willing to sit down with us and let's analyze what's been ineffective and maybe in some cases what has been effective. And so we do a lot of extrapolation to find out what are we going to need to do differently this time. So the simplest way I can answer that question is identify the leverage, right? What would cause the person to make a better decision than they're going to make on their own accord to enter long-term treatment? And we have to identify that, B. And if we don't do that, what we can't count on is for the chronic alcoholic or the chronic addict to make a good decision for themselves, right? We just won't be able to wait around for that. So it's all about the leverage. Ultimately, what happens is the person that shows up to Burning Tree really can't do Burning Tree. That would oftentimes be a true statement if they're saying, "Hey, I'm here. It's my first month. I can't do this. It's too long, right? Or it's too challenging, or it's too hard." And a lot of times I'll sit down with them and I'll say, "You know what? I think you're probably right. The person that showed up here probably can't do Burning Tree." But as we do the work and as we get into the solution, right, what we find out invariably is the person that can, they show up, right? And those are the persons that get and stay sober for the rest of their lives. And these are, to put it mildly, we treat hopeless cases. And I think that's the best way to put it. We're not treating the soccer mom who had a second DUI and has been drinking boxed wine on the weekend and maybe needs a treatment episode. That's not who we're treating. We're treating chronic, late stage addiction, right? We're really, almost every family member would agree, we're looking at 6 to 18 months before end of life, right? That's typically our client. So
Wow.
it takes an extraordinary effort, not just on our part, but on the family's part. They really do the heavy lifting, the family members do. They really do.
Yeah.
They do things that are courageous, new and brave, and sometimes scary.
I'm just thinking about the time thing, and how when you get a young person, a month seems like an eternity. And I mean, I went to treatment when I was 41. I was kind of at that exact median average age. But even for me, I was like, a month, oh my God. But a month for a younger person seems longer just because they're a young person.
Mm-hmm.
But then the older somebody is, theoretically, the more life they've got, more responsibilities, work, family, children, wife, ex-wife, whatever it is. So threading that needle is just something that's really something to behold. And I've seen you talking to families many times, and it's an amazing thing but what you just said seems like, when you're looking a family in the eye and saying this person has 6 to 18 months until end of life, the family has got to be like, wow, that is such a reality check. But then the client, being a borderline hopeless, sick and suffering alcoholic or addict, it doesn't register.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't.
Brooke, I have kind of a question for you. So, I think so. We're big fans of Burning Tree. Love what you guys do. We've seen some amazing success stories from individuals going through your program. So big fan. Immediately when we're talking about long-term treatment, year plus, I automatically start thinking of like neurology, like what's the reasons of, why is it that somebody needs to be in treatment for a year? But instead of me trying to answer that question, I thought I'd let you do that for us.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to be said about that, Justin. You're not wrong. I mean, when we look at brain healing times and really what's required, especially when I've abused my brain and really my whole person, right, through years of addiction and chronic addiction, there's significant recovery times physically, obviously mentally, and then also what a lot of people leave out or forget about or just never seem to acknowledge is the spiritual aspect, right? So if we really want to look at the mind, body, spirit, I mean, addiction is devastating to the human spirit, right? And so the human spirit requires sustenance, right? It requires recuperation and recovery times. And, as much as I want to brag on our team and our skilled therapists and our psychiatric department and all the great things that we offer, really the true hero is really time. Like that's what we have on our side that, a lot of programs just don't get to have on their side, right? If I'm trying to pull off, 16 years of really chronic end-stage addiction in a 30, 60, 90-day window, I mean, good luck, right? It's a near impossible task. And we have the benefit and we have the gift of time, right? And that's obviously to our clients and our families' benefit. And it's to our benefit as a treatment team. Because as you know, especially a chronic addict and alcoholic, they're really pros at being able to hold their breath for 30, 60, and even 90 days, meaning hold their breath. I'm not going to show you the truth about my history, my background, what's going on up here, what's happening in here. And then we're going to get to day 45 or 60, and I'm going to go and transition to maybe outpatient or sober living or go back home, right? And then we know largely what happens from there, right? And so I've held my breath. Well, when we have the benefit of time, it's really, really difficult to hold our breath for that long. And ultimately we show up because a Burning Tree Ranch client, all the things that brought them to the doorstep of a very long-term intensive drug and alcohol treatment program, all those things that brought them to that point, guess what? They all get to end up playing out on the stage of long-term treatment, right? So, and that can look myriad. But back to your question on the neurology, I mean, obviously we're offering a lot of features, neurofeedback and neurotherapy is a huge component of our programming, just like our equine therapy, which is really a precursor to in-depth trauma work because we have the benefit of time. We're not starting trauma work in that first 90 days. Typically, we don't even start it in the first 6 months, right? We really want our clients to establish a foundation, not only in their recovery, but in their peer support, right? In their daily disciplines and the structure and the accountability of our programming. And then as we assess through equine therapy, through neurofeedback, and through clinical trials, we can gauge and determine that person's appropriateness to start really intensive trauma therapy, right? So typically the later half will be that trauma treatment aspect. That could be start at month 7, 8, or 9 and go to month 15 or 12, depending on the where the patient's at. Then we have them for a whole additional year after that in our aftercare apparatus. So all of that continues. It doesn't stop at month 13 of inpatient treatment. They're with us another year receiving clinical services as they begin to reintegrate with the daily disciplines of life and life on life's terms. That's continuing a career, holding a job, family engagements, travel, vacations, saving, all the things that go into life, right? They're still going to continue with whatever they started to work on in inpatient, and whatever they're growing towards, continues into that aftercare apparatus. Because on average, our clients are with us 2 to 2.5 years grand total, right? That's the average. They typically graduate with about close to 2.5 years sober, most of them, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It is. And it's a real testament, obviously, to their courage, right? But it's a very, very big shout out. I want to give a very big shout out to our families who have found the courage and the resilience to do something different. Burning Tree's hard. It's a difficult program. It's a hard program. It's a structured program. It's a program focused on accountability, right? And that's not just accountability for the client, but for the family to ensure that they're doing something different, right? That they're working on their own independent recoveries, that they're involved in their own therapy, their own 12-step program. And we hold them accountable to that in a loving way, right? In an encouraging and loving way. But our position is, Justin and B, there's a simple statement that we have and we live by it. And we believe that accountability is the very, very highest form of compassion for our client, for our families. Accountability. That's what compassion looks like.
Yeah, I keep thinking when, as you're explaining it, how we've all had these conversations with families when the loved one needs help and they've been to treatment a bunch of times, and either the loved one, the family member who's sending the client, or the client himself will say, I've been to treatment, so I could run a group.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like you just overcome all that by saying, well, this is different, and this is going to be long enough where that, like you just said, holding your breath, and people who can basically, quote unquote, run a group, but just can sort of check a box. They've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, and we'll just say all the right things. And we've seen it at New Waters. We've seen it in our lives elsewhere too, where they can just get through it and then, fake it until they make it, really with no intention of making it, if that makes sense.
Well, it's like anything, any other skill, I think, right? And I think, in addiction, we have to build those skills, right, to be able to protect and maintain those behaviors and things like that. And for this individual or these people that are, chronic relapsers, they just have that much more experience. They've honed those skills that much more. And I think, to everybody's point here in this conversation, it just takes simply a lot longer to unlearn and to learn a new different way of living. Yeah, I mean, I love the model, and I mean, what you said, people coming out on the other end of the program with 2+ years of sobriety. I mean, that's amazing. That is
I mean,
amazing.
our graduations for our clients that we call make it to the podium, graduate to the podium. Those celebrations, they happen on Thursday nights during our family programming, which our family programming happens 5 times a year. And these are big celebrations. I mean, lots of people come from all over the country, outside of the country, to show up and celebrate a graduation, right? So you've got, maybe if it's a young person, mom and dad, or sisters, brothers, and you know their clients or their fellow partners in recovery that they've forged relationships and friendships with for that 2.5 years are all there to speak on their behalf. And it's huge, because by that point, 2.5 years, I mean, they're unrecognizable in terms of how their lives have transformed. And we have this thing about, when it comes to transformation, it's really less about hey, my life has been transformed. I've got this great career now. I've got this awesome wife, or whatever the case. It's more really about, like, I've been transformed, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Totally.
And
Yeah,
so
I remember.
those
Go ahead.
transformations are real. They're measurable. You can't fool a family, right? I mean, the families, they know, right? They know that they're looking at a son or a daughter or a spouse or a partner that's completely transformed. I mean, they know.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I remember I heard this lady speaking on a Zoom during COVID, and she was talking about how she had been sober for a few years, and she had gotten her marriage back and her kids back and her job back, and was back in living with their family, but she hadn't been working on her program at all. And she said, I realized that my life was getting better, but I wasn't getting better. And I feel like that's kind of what you're saying. It's like, just because somebody gets a great job, or it seems on the outside that they're succeeding in life, without that spiritual experience that you mentioned through working, this program of recovery with some time, then they're not necessarily getting better. When just their lives can get better without the person getting better from the inside out, I guess is what I'm saying. It sounds like that's what happens there.
That's very well said. Yeah. So
yeah, in a perfect world, my life and my spirit, they keep up with each other. It's not always the case, but that's the idea.
That's the goal, right? You just made me think of, and we see these examples all the time, but the classic, I feel like I just heard it the other day, and it's like, hey, client, we feel like you should probably go away and do some residential treatment, right? Just using that as an example. And not only the client, but the family is like, no, I think, client just needs to, start working out and, focus more on like family and work, and, everything will be fine. And it's, I think that's just a testament to, we don't know what we don't know, number one. And I think families as well, like there's just a lack of education of, what that hole in our soul, so to speak, or that lack of purpose is, and what kind of work it's going to take to actually get to a place to where we live a more fulfilled life. And the unfortunate reality is it's not just going to the gym and, putting more time into our career and our family. It's just simply not going to cut it. And I think that's where we see a lot of the relapse, right? Mm-hmm. Is that we pop those Band-Aids in place and they just don't do the job, unfortunately.
I'll give you a little anecdote speaking about transformed lives, right? And I think what you were saying, Justin, is maybe you don't recognize the transformed life from the external sense, right? Maybe
right.
You, the onlooker, are like, okay, it's the internal thing that happens, right? And that develops. And so for our clients, there's a consistent litmus test that's going on, because we measure their progress in a couple different ways. One of them is we're measuring what's the resistance versus the willingness. Early on, typically you're going to see for the Burning Tree client who's been to 8, 12, 20 treatment centers, a significant form of resistance. But as treatment progresses and recovery develops, the idea is that you see less and less resistance. And then what do you see? You see more willingness. So resistance versus willingness, that's a great litmus test to gauge the quality of recovery as the person, progresses through our treatment program over a long-term period of time. But there's another one that you might not guess at, and it's real simple and it's easy to gauge. And at Burning Tree, we have a lot of community groups where it's the whole milieu, right? And there'll be 2, 3 therapists in there, our executive director, and a lot of questions happen in this group. And a lot of the questions are yes or no questions that would warrant, you guessed it, a yes or a no answer. For chronic relapsers, you would be shocked and surprised, and that sometimes there's some knee slapping going on. The unwillingness, near inability, I would say unwillingness to answer yes or no questions. I'll try to come up with an example. Did you do your chore in excellence this morning? That's a yes or no question. Well, see, what happened is so-and-so, and I had to help here, and I did this. Well, the answer would have been no. Right?
Right.
So early on in treatment, early on meaning that first 6 to 9 months would be early on at Burning Tree, a real reluctance to answer yes or no questions, right? And to sit with that and just be okay with like, hey, I gave the honest answer, right? And you see with our milieu a real skill at being able to manipulate and outmaneuver the question and showcase an answer that's not only dishonest, but misleading, right? Which doesn't ever help the chronic relapser find recovery. So we do a lot of redirection and support so that our clients can get to a place where they don't have to be right. They can just be happy. They don't have to be right. They can just be at peace. They don't have to be understood. They can just be serene. Because with the chronic relapser milieu, there's a really deep sense of dis-ease and unease in the spiritual sense and the inner sense that rocks them to the core. And we really, as we do all the things that we do at Burning Tree, want to bring them and support them to a place where they begin to be able to just become okay again, right? Or become okay for the very first time. And that's a great way, Justin and B, for us to gauge the progress that they're making. Can they answer a yes or no question? Can they give a no or a yes answer and just allow themselves to look bad, right? Without needing to defend it. So
Yeah.
that tells us
I
a
like
lot.
that.
Believe it or not, that tells us a whole lot about where they're at in their recovery process.
That's so interesting. I've never heard anybody explain it like that in the field basically, but it's funny. I hadn't thought about this in so long. In the March before I got sober in June of 2018, my brother sent me what I considered a scathing email at the time with this litany of all the stuff how I was, making his life, my life, everybody else's lives miserable. And one of the things he pointed out was you always have to have a story for everything. And that was so true. And it's one of the first things I tried to kind of tackle once I got out of treatment and was, working on a program of recovery here, is just to, I did learn that no is a complete sentence, but yes is a complete sentence too. And to not be able to feel like obligated to give some long-winded story instead of just a simple yes or no answer. And you're so right in that there's a lot of serenity and peace that does come from that. Just being honest, yes or no. I either did it or I didn't, and not having to feel like I needed to explain it and give some long-winded story. And then the other thing you said, which is what we're all striving for, is choosing being happy over being right.
That's big.
And that is so key. And and they're totally, like you just said, I mean, they're definitely tied together. That, if I can just sort of explain it right, then I can maybe get both out of it, be happy and right. But gotta choose. Yeah. That's an interesting litmus test for sure.
Well, I think also B, to your point, you said you got the scathing email from your brother.
He was right about everything, by the way.
What's that?
He was right about everything.
Exactly. Right. And same here. I had the same thing going on like most of us have, right? And a real inability and unwillingness, perhaps, to see myself clearly, right? And how I've showed up and how I've impacted others and how I've, destroyed trust. So one of the things we like to help our clients understand and focus on, you'll hear all the time, well, if I could just stop drinking, or if I could just stop doing drugs or stop relapsing, or you may hear a mom or a dad or someone close to them say, yeah, if they could, if they would just stop doing drugs. But the reality is, as you know, is that's only a tiny, 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 tiny part of the problem, right?
Yeah.
Because even when we take the drugs or the alcohol away and I'm in my 4th month of treatment or my 2nd or my 9th, the behaviors are still there, right? And so my behaviors either point towards recovery and continued transformation and growth, or in my case, my behaviors point towards deterioration, right? Destroying more trust and potentially another drink or another drug. And there's really no middle ground on that. Um, you know, we're real big at our program. We're definitely what we would call 12-step immersion, 12-step facilitation. That is a significant component of our program. Of course, there's the clinical and psychiatric, but it all dovetails and meshes with the 12 steps, right? And that tells you that, the amends process is something that's we want to be very central to the themes of our clients' recovery, right? And you'll hear from time to time, especially in that first, second, third, 5th month, like, oh, I need to make amends for all the times I got drunk or all the times I, did drugs, at an important event. And while that may be important, it's very rare do I hear a family member say, they owe me an amends for being drunk on the airplane to Hawaii. Really what it comes down to is it's all the behaviors that really, regardless of whether I was inebriated or not or under the influence, those behaviors happened. We want to help our clients focus on the behaviors, less about the drinking, less about the drug use, and more about the behaviors. Because if I'm going into the amends process, I'm certainly not going to come to you, B, and say, well, B, I'm terribly sorry that I showed up that way at your wedding, but you have to remember I was drunk at that time. Like, we want to leave the drinking and the drugs out of it completely. That gives me a better shot at just owning my behavior and being able to have more clarity on the amends that I owe you and the behaviors that I get a chance to change, right? And to hear you out on your part about how this may have affected you. And for me not to make any assumptions about how me showing up at your wedding drunk and the behaviors that I don't want to make assumptions about how that affected you, right? I need to learn that from you. And I can only do that if you give me the opportunity by asking questions, right? So, the chronic relapse client, more than most, is a person who, I'll give you a great example. We don't want to ask questions. And why don't we want to ask questions? You guessed it, because a lot of times we don't want to know the answers. So, we blew a client's mind the other day when he was asking in a group setting. He'd been there about 4 months, and he hadn't written his mom or dad a letter. He's a young man. I think he's 24, 25. Hadn't written a letter other than to ask for some things, some shoes, some pants, a pair of boots, sunglasses. And he asked in group, he says, well, if I write them, like, what should I write them about? What should I tell them about? What would they want to know about? And I just looked at him and I said, have you asked them? And he looked at me and he was like, no, I haven't. And see, therein lies a lot of our answers, right? Like, and what he got to do is he got to send a letter home and say, hey, what would you guys like to hear about from me as I write letters home each month or twice a month? And now they have an opportunity to tell them. But our clients, they don't really want to know the answers sometimes. Hey, mom and dad, what could I do to start the process of earning your trust back? Because a lot of them say they want trust, but what we find with our milieu and our clientele is there's a huge chasm and a huge difference between what I say I want and what I really want. If I really want something, all my behaviors and actions align with that. Otherwise, it's just something that I say I want. So, we might propose the question, do you really want to earn their trust back? Yes, I do. Well, then why don't you write them a letter and ask them, what are the top 10 things you can do starting today and for the next period of time that you can start doing that are measurable to regain that trust and earn that trust back? But in those early phases of treatment, month 3, month 7, month 10, they may not want to ask those questions, because a lot of times what the family members want is like, hey, for starting out, we just want you to complete Burning Tree.
Yeah.
Right? We just want you to do what they're asking you to do and to complete it in excellence all the way through. That's it. But the burning tree client, especially at month 2, 3, 4, might not want to hear that answer, because most of our clients at that 2, 3, 4, 5 month period, we're still trying to figure out a way about how am I going to get out of this and into greener pastures and onto the sober living, or back in home with mom and dad, or back over here at my condo in Austin, you see. So if you wonder about, wow, some clients are there 13, 14, 15 months and even longer, they are typically because that first 2, 4, 6 months was spent trying to figure out how to get out of treatment, right? And not make the commitment and not make the surrender. That's where we go back to holding our breath, right? How long can I hold my breath, right, before the real me is exposed? I know I can do it in a 30-day treatment program all day long, probably a 16 to 92. But at some point, that's where our benefit of time comes into place, that the real me shows up. And as you guys know, that's who we need to be treating.
Absolutely.
Right? Not the culture, not the presentation of yourself that you can manifest and maintain for 45 days, but the actual real you that brought you to the doorsteps of a 2-year treatment commitment. That's what we need to be treating. Those are the behaviors, the belief systems, the concepts that we want to address and to support you with, right?
Yeah, and you said, I mean, you just said the word that's the first time this has come up on this podcast, which that word surrender. And I guess
Yeah,
when the clients are finally done trying to hold their breath,
Yeah.
that's kind of when they're done faking it and just trying to get through 3 months. And with that timeline in front of them, I would imagine that's when somebody says, you know what, I'm here. I've been here for 3 months. Why don't I just let go, surrender, and just, what's the worst that can happen?
that's exactly what happens with almost every client, right? There are some anomalies and exceptions, but you're right. Sometimes it can be quicker, 30 days, 45 days, right? But on average, you hit it. On average, it's a lot closer to 3, 4, 5 months, right? Before it's like, okay, I am going to do this program. My family is going to lovingly hold the line with me. And I'm going to make a surrender. So now I'm going to focus on moving forward in my recovery, moving forward in treatment. And you can tell because all the behaviors in treatment that we monitor and track very, very closely, they all align with that surrender. It's very easy to monitor and gauge through the observation of behavior if someone is really willing and surrendered versus really resistant and unsurrendered, right? I mean, the two they're totally different. So, but a lot of times our clients have been really good at masking that resistance with their ability to really employ black degree or a black belt, judo type of vernacular, where they're really able to outmaneuver almost any conversation with a psychiatrist, with a therapist, with a treatment team, their peers, where it really confuses everybody and leaves even the family members wondering if they're the crazy ones, right? And, and our client is typically that good that they're able to create discord, create mistrust, right? And facilitate all types of shenanigans, right? That really enable them to continue with the same harmful behaviors they've been engaged with for 5, 10, 15, 25 years. And they've met their match when they come to Burning Tree, because we're not gauging on the words that they use. We're just and only looking at the behavior, because the behavior tells us everything. The words are just words, right? And unfortunately for them, for however many years, families, treatment programs, providers have fallen victim to their ability to confuse and riddle with their mastery of the English language, right? These are smart people. They're sophisticated. Most of them are very well educated and in some form have been successful in certain areas of their life. But what they've not been good at is following direction, taking suggestion, executing on principles, and engaging in those daily disciplines of recovery. In those areas, they've gotten Fs, right? But in a lot of areas, when they become recovered and they establish through a power greater than themselves that transformation, I mean, wow, sky's the limit for them, as I'm sure each of you know, right? So it's really amazing to get to watch, and And along the way, it can be sometimes humorous, sometimes frustrating, but always fascinating because it is the human condition, right? Yeah.
Well, Brooke, that's amazing. I mean, that was one of the better explanations of what a treatment center does and how they're different. And so, you know, a lot of people who watch and listen are people who have loved ones who are chronic relapsers and need the kind of help that you provide at Burning Tree. How do people find you?
Well, as stated, I mean, people find us through avenues like this, where there's other providers like New Waters Recovery, other, physicians, therapists, clinicians, treatment providers. That's how people find us. And they reach out to us. And what we promise is to offer outstanding customer service, right? To answer questions, to provide resources. One thing that we will never do is move a family forward with us when they're not prepared or they're not ready or they're not a fit, because Burning Tree is only designed for the late stage chronic relapser. If that person would benefit from a 30, 60, 90-day program, a dual diagnosis program, a gender specific program, you name it, we want to make the referral there. We know who a Burning Tree client is, right? And we're only treating Burning Tree clients. So if any family that wants to call and explore with us the resources available, our commitment, sure, we'll vet out whether their loved one would be appropriate for Burning Tree. But really, that's only about 1 in 10 inquiries would be deemed appropriate for Burning Tree Ranch, right? The rest, we want to make a professional referral to what we would believe clinically would be the best avenue support for their loved one. So we're willing to talk to anyone. We want to engage them. We want to wrap our arms around them and support them and align them, with the help that they need, right? And that doesn't have to be Burning Tree, because by no means do we have a monopoly, right? We're treating one very unique, chronic, relapsing, late stage addiction client. That's it. So.
Love it. Well, I think that's a great place to stop. Brooke, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brooke.
Solomon, and thank you, Justin. Thank you, all three.
If you liked what you heard today or just want to know more, give us a call on 919-670-8119 or visit us at newwatersrecovery.com. Thank you.